Hello, everyone. Welcome to Laser Focus. This is the deep dive pop culture podcast from Nerdist. My name's Kyle Anderson. Thank you so much for listening. We have a really interesting and fun special episode today. It's you will not be hearing me very much, and that's a treat for everyone. No, right now I'm joined by a friend of the show, a current, past, and future guest. That's such a weird way to say that. Anyway, Tai Gooden's here. Hi, Tai.
Hello.
Hello. And so Ty had come up with this really interesting idea for an episode for this month, it being Black History Month, and yeah, so and sort of about talking to somebody who worked on Milestone Comics, and is a Black comic creator, and that is something that even still, like when Milestone started, was a rarity, and is even still kind of a rarity, which is I was going to say it's unfortunate, but it's the world. So anyway,
Yeah.
but I wanted to yeah, Ty, so what was your kind of, what is Milestone Comics, first of all, for those of you who don't know, but then how did you get in how did you become aware of them, and also of Micheline Hess, who is our guest for the episode?
Yeah. So I'll start off with what Milestone Comics is. So Milestone Media was actually a company founded by a few black male comic creators back in the early '90s. It was Dwayne McDuffie, Dennis Cowan, Michael Davis, and Derek T. Dingle that all came together because they just wanted to address the lack of representation in the comic industry, not only behind the comic pages but also on the page as well. So DC Comics was actually Milestone Media's parent company, and they helped to distribute their whole like Milestone Comics arm, which gave us few characters that we know today, like Static Shock, Hardware, Icon, and Rocket of Young Justice fame. It also established the Dakotaverse, which of course is where everything within that universe took place. That's where a lot of the characters were from. So it really was its own universe, separate from what you get with DC, separate from what you get with Marvel at the time. Milestone Comics, of course, centered around Black stories and Black characters, and those comics really did a great job of telling like bold and honest truths. Sometime to the point that it would get pushed back from general readers who didn't quite understand why those things needed to be addressed in comics. There was also definitely some friction between DC Comics and the Milestone Media leaders too about what should appear on pages and what people should and should not be discussing. So the comics division stayed around for a few years before it kind of shuttered down in the late '90s. There was a bit of a dip in comics overall. Then there was just kind of like a almost like an oversaturation that happened for a bit, and then things started going downward. But Milestone Comics actually made a resurgence probably about trying to think, maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, and they started kind of creating and stuff a bit more. The great thing about Milestone is that a lot of those marginalized creators that worked on those comics back in the '90s just went on to have really great and successful careers. And Micheline Hess is actually one of those people who has built her own independent comic career in her own right, and that's why I was so interested in speaking with her. I had actually picked up one of Micheline's comics online. Like I saw her in a list of just Black women comic creators that you should know and need to follow. And I was looking at a way to be able to introduce my girls to the world of comics. And so I'm like, okay, who are some Black women like YA comic creators? And I saw her on that list, and Malice and Ovenland looked really interesting. It's about this kid who gets tasked with having to clean her oven, which is like probably the worst summer vacation task you could get. And she ends up going on a deep dive inside of her oven and finding like this whole other like weird and kind of gross and wacky fantasy land. I love the artwork immediately on the front cover. Like my kids were drawn to it. They were like, "Oh, well, she looks like us. She kind of has these afro-looking ponytails and such." And I just really fell in love with her storytelling, and I just wanted to read everything that she had out there. So I got a chance to interview her for a magazine that's now defunct a few years ago, and she was one of the first people that I thought of when I was like, okay, who do I want to be able to talk to and just ask about their time at Milestone? Because we talked pretty heavily about Malice and Ovenland, but we didn't get a chance to talk about her Milestone career at all and kind of how that shaped her as a creator. So I was able to get in contact with her, and she was more than willing to be able to speak on her experience there, which is so cool. Like
Yeah.
Yeah, like, you can talk about talk about the comics and talk about the characters, and you can read a whole bunch of information. I mean, it's out there everywhere, but to get a chance to actually speak with someone who was in the room and actually working on these different projects is pretty cool.
Yeah, and like, one of the things about Milestone that I think is so interesting and great is that, like, there had been black superhero characters before, but they were all, I mean, even the good ones were like very gimmicky, or at least from
Yeah,
their
yeah.
outset. Like, you can't see a character named Black Panther who began in the 70s and not think, well, this is clearly a
A
riff on
reference to Black
something.
Panther. Yeah.
Um and that's because so many of those were like, well, even from the best of intentions, they were still characters created by white creators, and like
Right.
it's only through that lens, and they don't have. And so when Milestone, started, it was very much like it was an entirely black run
Mhm.
organization, and Micheline talks about this in your interview, like everybody there was black and had the same sort of, not the same frame of references entirely, but like we're all kind of approaching it from the same direction, which I think is, and it's extra awesome that then a lot of those characters now have been woven into like the main proper DC
Yeah.
comics. The fact that Static Shock was part of the DC animated universe back in the early 2000s. Like, that
Mhm.
is very rare at the time for a character like that to get a couple of seasons.
Yeah, and that was actually my gateway into Milestone Comics
Mm,
because I
yeah.
saw that series and I wanted to know more about this character. And so, I went out digging and searching. It was a little bit harder to find things back then than it is now. But, when I got my hands on, a couple of issues, I was like, wow, like these characters feel authentic and real. And you can tell that they were written by people who understand, what it means to be black and what it means to experience the world through our lens.
Like I said, like there's definitely more people of color just across the board, and women of color too,
Mhm.
creating comics. But that was a very much a rarity when Milestone started, and
Yeah.
women of color especially. And so that's, yeah, like, was really cool that. And Micheline has such an interesting story, which you'll hear in a moment, folks. But like started with comics, then stopped for a long time, went and did like fine art basically training, and then came back
Yeah.
to comics. And that's, yeah. Um, what is something, well, I guess we could talk about it at the end, but what's something that you didn't know about just the industry, I guess, before you talked to her?
Yeah, I mean, I was just really curious about the how she felt about being a part of that collective, especially with it being
Mm,
started by, kind of male centric and male run. And I asked her a little bit about this or whatever because I was just curious, and I brought it up in our interview about how she felt in that space as a woman back then because I know now, I mean, women in, especially geek and nerd spaces, like we have to go through a lot to be able to be recognized and to be seen and to be heard sometimes. And so I just wanted to know what her experience, was like there. And I was really glad, and really thrilled that it was a good one and a positive one, and that's kind of like the resounding thing that I've seen and read when people are talking about their experience at Milestone, that it felt really collaborative and that, like, Dwayne and Derek, like, would come and, like, sit in the bullpen and work with people, and, it wasn't like they were some bigwigs sitting up in an office somewhere and expecting, the minions under them to get the work done or whatever. They were a part of the work and a part of the process, every step of the way, and I just thought that was super dope. It's awesome to really think about Milestone and how much its legacy is still kind of resonating today, Like, DC Comics just started a couple of years ago, their Milestone initiative. So,
mm.
basically, you have diverse creatives, and they don't have to be Black, just somebody that's kind of from a marginalized background who are able to submit in their work, and if you're chosen, you get a chance to come out to this summit that DC holds, where you'll get a chance to get, like, intensive training and development to really be able to upgrade your craft, whether you're a colorist, whether you're just a general like penciler, whether you're an inker, whether you're a writer, no matter what you do in the comics industry, they'll give them a platform and give them a chance to be able to get their work out there in front of people. And that's them honoring the legacy that these guys set up with Milestone Media like today. So it's really dope how it's resonating 30 something years later.
Yeah, and especially considering, the great Dwayne McDuffie has since passed away. Like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
very, it's a great legacy, like you said, like for his work and all the work of them who started Milestone. Yeah. All right, folks. Well, now you're going to listen to Ty talk to Micheline Hess. It's a really great discussion, and then Ty and I will be back to wrap things up. But yeah, take it away, Ty, who's in the past?
Hi, I'm Tai Gooden, the features editor at Nerdist, and this episode of Laser Focus is about celebrating Black comic history. So today I'm chatting with Micheline Hess, a comic artist and creator whose works include Malice in Ovenland and Diary of a Mad Black Werewolf. Prior to building an independent comic career, Micheline got her start in the comics industry as a colorist for Milestone Comics. I am so thrilled to have you here and to be speaking with you today. How are you?
Great. Thank you for inviting me on. It's really great to be here today.
Awesome, awesome. So, before we get into your milestone career and all the wonderful things you've done beyond that, let's go back to your childhood. What was your gateway into the world of comics?
Uh, the closet door and a purple marker. Um, yeah, I started off. Amazingly, I lived to tell the tale. My mother was a teacher, however, and she saw
Mhm.
that I had a liking for drawing, and so she would bring home supplies quite often. She would bring home colored paper and pencils and markers and things. And that stayed with me. My brother also has a natural inclination towards it. Uh, and then when I was in middle school, it was really getting out of control. My teacher pulled my mom aside in the fifth grade, and she was like, "Miss Hess, you have to find an outlet for your daughter." So she signed me up at the Art Students League of New York, and I started going there on Saturdays, and I would draw still lifes. I would draw models and things like that, and I
Yeah,
still drew all over my homework and all over like my desk. But it was a really great experience to have that as part of my life, and I'm eternally glad that my mom, despite being from a part of the world. She grew up in the West Indies, and it was kind of place where you grow up, you have a trade, like you don't really encourage, the arts in quotes and things like that. You're a
right.
lawyer, you're a doctor. So she never tried to squash that. You know what I mean? She always tried to encourage it and nurture it. So yeah, that's
I
where
love
my
that.
father put me onto cartoons too. By the way, well, comics as it were. It's all his
Oh,
fault.
wow. Yeah. So, what kind of comics did your dad introduce you to?
Well, he would travel. He was a businessman, and his work would take him to different parts of the world, and he would come back a lot of times with these comics, like Lucky Luke was one. It was like a cowboy
Okay.
and his talking horse, and Piff. It was a dog, and Hercule, and there was Tintin or Tintin. Sometimes he would bring me these jumbo comics. One of the best ones was this jumbo Wonder Woman comic, and it was like
Oh,
giant,
cool.
and
Yeah.
I adored that thing so much. I barely cared about Wonder Woman. Actually, I was more interested in all the horses that were, and then some of the Amazons were riding these giant kangaroos, and I was like, wow. But then sometimes I would also tail my brother to the candy store on the corner. We lived in Flatbush at that time, and I would
Okay.
buy comic books, and there was like also Wendy the Witch and Little Devil and things like that.
Yeah, that's lovely. So, did you end up going to college and studying, getting any kind of degree in like art, or how did your art career progress from that point forward?
It's an interesting, yeah. It was non-linear as you could as you could hope not to be. I went to
Okay.
college. I went to Sarah Lawrence College. Um, it was a really amazing experience. I came out of there with a Bachelor of Fine Arts,
Okay.
and I had no idea what to do with it or what to do with myself. I had no plan.
Mhm.
In that respect, it was kind of rough. I was already having, the debt. Although at that time I was in a place where I was just in a whole other mental space. Where I was just like,
Yeah.
oh, debt. Oh, it's going into arrears. Oh, um. So I ended up getting a job at the museum gift shop, the Guggenheim gift shop on Broadway, which is now the
Okay.
Prada store, and I started working there. Much to my mom's chagrin, I think she kind of had more hopes to me. My father had passed away at that point. Um, yeah, but I was working in retail, and yeah, I just fell into a I don't know, a rhythm that was just very get up, go to work, don't
Yeah.
have to really produce anything, and just come home and just be miserable. And then at one point, my mother told me that Milestone Comics was looking for people, And I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh my god." And at that point, all I had as far as a computer, I had a Power Mac 120, which I think was the only time they were producing Macintosh clones. And it's like 120 megahertz, which is just like, insert fart sound here, but that's what I had. And I created a semblance of a portfolio, and I just kind of hung out there, and was very persistent. As a matter of fact, I quit my job the same day I decided to do that. So I don't know if that's something I
Wow.
would necessarily recommend. Um, I just kind of did it, and they were like, "Oh, bye." And so I went and I got a job as a colorist at Milestone, and I was training under Jason Scott Jones,
Mhm.
and he taught me. It was an interesting. The everything was hand painted, and everything looked like watercolor, but the paint behaved like permanent marker. So there was definitely like an art to using them.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot with him, and it was incredible. I actually thought I'd kind of made it. I was like,
Yeah.
well, here I am. This is it. And then I got laid off like less than a year later because things were starting to fold under the weight of the pressure that DC was putting on the company.
Right, right. Yeah. So even though your time there was short, you know, tell me kind of what your experience was like overall. What was the collaborative process there? Did you get a chance to really work with a lot of people, or what was it like to actually be in that environment?
It was it was amazing. Um, for one thing, there were black folk everywhere, and that was really exciting. And there were black
Yeah.
folk everywhere creating characters who were, black and all different ethnicities. There were women there, um, and it was the vibe was just it was a really kind of familial sort of vibe.
Yeah.
Um, I never felt like people were trying to kind of keep me in a box or put me anywhere. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot just about like the whole process. I never even saw myself ending up there. And I also
Mhm.
remember just being really, really proud, because I was doing that. It was tough at the time because Image Comics was really hot back then,
Mhm.
and I think that the popular way of coloring comics was using digital process and using these really bright gradients, and the colors were really powerful and dynamic, and I think that was hard. That was a hard thing to go against, because it was very attractive, and it
Got it. Yeah.
instantly kind of grabbed your. So I think in a lot of ways, people after things went down, like people came to sort of appreciate the hand coloring process a lot more because it was also very unique. Um, and yeah, it was amazing to come into work and be like, I'm going to paint today and I'm going to get paid for it. And that was really awesome. And not just
That's
painting,
awesome.
but painting characters that looked like me and looked like my friends, with stories that were relatable and powerful. Yeah, so in that way, it was very dreamlike.
Yeah, I love that, and I love specifically that you said you felt, comfortable and accepted of being yourself. I know women a lot of times, especially those of us that kind of work in like the geek nerd sphere, we feel like we always have to fight for like a place where we belong and fight for recognition and like fair
Yeah.
treatment and stuff. So that's awesome that you got a
Yes.
chance to actually experience that in that space. Yeah.
Yeah, it was it was brief. And in that time, yeah, I've worked in other tech spaces and tech design spaces, and I have come up against that whole like, ma'am, the dilithium crystals in this, computer aren't working. It's like you can tell me what's wrong, like I'll understand it. Um,
Right.
Scenarios, yeah. So yeah, in it's kind of a wistful feeling, or it could be entirely possible that I was just so kind of high on the thrill of it all, I didn't necessarily see all of it.
Yeah.
That's a possibility, yeah. But
Yeah,
yeah, I was.
absolutely. So once you left Milestone and kind of went on to start doing your own thing as an independent creative, how did the skills and things you learned there help to really shape and sharpen you as an artist?
It's funny. After I left Milestone, I went right back to the same cash register I was standing behind before.
Wow.
The same one. They very nicely took me back, even though I just walked out the last time. And
Especially
I
after you
was,
quit on the spot. Yeah.
yeah, I was like, hey. um, what was what actually really changed things? Because after I went to Milestone, I didn't think about comics. I was very jaded, and that plus like things going on in my home life, I just felt like I had failed.
Mhm.
So during that time, I had begun to become re-interested in Japanese animation, and
Okay.
at that point, it wasn't as ubiquitous it is now to every store or every online. If you were buying, like, I was ordering VHS tapes, bootleg VHS tapes from like California, because like
Oh,
that
yeah.
was the only where place it was coming from at one point. And then I met these guys who was Tokyo and Brooklyn who were selling them down by the DMV. Um, and then I started playing video games that were Japanese, and I got my PlayStation chipped at this place called, well, I don't know if I can give the name, but it was a PS1, and they put this chip in it that allows you to play import games. But I couldn't read the text. So I was like, "What's
Mhm.
going?" With adventure, with like more advanced things. There was more dialogue, and I was just completely clueless. So I started taking classes at the place upstairs from the store, which was the Tenri Cultural Institute, and they were giving
Mhm.
Japanese lessons. And so
That's
I
cool.
went to there. Yeah, I went there after work a few times a week, and then in my second semester they had like this offering where they would, if you could cover your ticket and like meals, you could go on like this 3-week trip to Japan, and they would put you up, and
Wow.
yeah, it was great. And so I
Yeah.
was like, oh my god, like that was the only thing that mattered to me in life, was that trip. And so I worked and I saved my money. I didn't buy anything. I didn't buy any games. I didn't buy any crap. Um, and I went on that trip, and it was such a a shift in my perspective that when I came back
Mhm.
3 weeks later, and I was sitting outside, and I was just like, "What the hell am I doing here?" So I started trying other things. Like, I don't have to be here. This is ridiculous. After everything I went through on this trip and everything I accomplished, I can definitely take this further. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
downloaded back then. There's a program Flash. There was actually back then there was a company called Macromedia, and they put out
Mhm.
like Dreamweaver and Flash, and so I downloaded I downloaded Flash on a dial-up, and I started teaching myself how to do animation with this app, with this application. And I started using it and using it. And so through that, I got my first internet job, my first new media job. Um,
Cool.
and that was up in North White Plains, and I had to take like 3 trains. Back in my day, I took
Oh my
three
gosh.
trains to get there. Sometimes I would literally end up in Valhalla if I took the wrong train. So,
Oh,
yeah,
no.
that was through that. And after that, it was sort of a springboard, because at the same time, the tech bubble was growing, and so you could get these jobs in so many different places, and they'd pay you a mint. and
Right, yeah.
and that's what I ended up doing for a little while. But I didn't start
Dang.
comics
Yeah.
until around 2010, and at that point I had actually gone back to school. I went to Parsons, and I got a master's in design and technology,
Mhm.
and I started doing games, like casual gaming that they used to have for sites like Cartoon Network and Adult Swim, and I was designing games for them, and that was a
Got it.
lot of
Yeah.
fun. And then I ended up at Nickelodeon, and I very aggressively pursued the job of senior designer for their marketing department. I mean, it was
Mhm.
like, "Kid, kid, kid, ha, ha, ha." I was I was like looking up names and being like, "Hey, so where on the street is you're the director of such and such." I don't know who that person was, but I greatly admire her from afar. So,
Oh
yeah, I
my
got a
gosh, that's
job
awesome.
there, and I
Yeah.
got to. I was like, things were changing. I had been there for maybe a year and change, maybe 2 years and change, and it was at a point where I was starting to get a little bored. They were gradually cutting down on the kinds of interactivity that they were building into like the stuff that I was designing. So we used
Mhm.
to, since I was in marketing, I would do a lot of pages for like sponsored websites. So like one time I designed a promotional site for the game Clue. So they had this upgraded version of their game for
Yeah.
DVD. And so with this version, you could solve a very simple mystery. And there was like, those magnifying glasses with like the red ruby lith, and you could see
Yeah.
different things. So me and the developer, his name was Felipe. Anyway, he coded that, and we presented that like at the annual, not the annual, but like the monthly what you got going on in your department meeting, and people loved it so much. My boss got a promotion. I got not much.
Wow.
And
No.
then they started taking away those kinds of things, and that's when I started doing Malice in Ovenland, because I didn't want to get to a point where I was like, I could have been a great comic book artist. Say that's nice, miss.
Yeah.
Take your medication. So I started drawing. I started using comic pages, 11 by 17 pages, and
Mhm.
micron pens. And yeah, I made the first issue, and I published it myself, and I got it printed. And yeah, it was all up and down and sideways and everywhere from there.
Yeah, I love that. Malice in Ovenland is probably one of my favorite, like, YA, like, graphic novels.
Oh, thank
I've
you.
read it a few times. I've got it home, share it with my kids and everything, so we
Oh,
enjoy that
good.
one so much.
I
Yeah,
need
and I
to do
noticed
more.
that. Right, yeah, yeah. So, like, I noticed that a lot of your work is very, like, YA focused for the most part. Why did you really choose to do that specific arena or target that audience?
Um, as going back to when my father would bring me those comic books,
Mhm.
I always enjoyed them, but every so often you would see characters who were black or African, and they weren't illustrated in the most complimentary way.
Yeah.
And I don't even think that was something that I was truly cognizant of at that age. But you would just look at the black person they drew and be like, "Wow, why are his lips like that?" Um, so I guess it's really a matter of creating what I want to see. That's first and foremost. Um, Yeah, I love the idea of having, especially like fantasy adventures. That's my favorite, with like magic and
Yeah.
passageways and things like that. I just love the idea of black kids seeing their themselves mirrored in those characters and being like, "Hey, we can go on adventures too." Like, not every one of our stories has to be rooted in trauma or
Mhm.
poverty, or not to say that those things don't exist, but like, why can't we just like have an adventure the way other characters do, where we
Yeah.
live in a nice house and we have a nice room, and something happens and we go somewhere, and maybe things get scary, but no one ever dies, and it's
Right,
going to be
yeah.
okay in the end. I just really like those things. There's a certain comfort in that for me. And so, yeah, I like telling those kinds of stories with friendship, and yeah.
Yeah, and I think that I mean, even for me, they Mouse and Everland, like, resonated as an adult because we all have that bit of escapism that we want to have and
Yeah,
wanderlust and, thinking about what's beyond what we know and what could
yeah,
happen. I mean, can you imagine traveling into your oven and going on this
yeah,
great
you end
weird
up someplace
adventure?
else. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I
and,
love that.
you meet new people. You make more friends, and you yeah, land in a giant pool of grease. But, yeah, that's what I liked, and I also incorporated aspects of something my mom would do when I was a kid in the summertime to keep me from getting bored. She would give me things to do, and one of the things to do is take water to the garden, because we had like a community garden, and the water system was always going down. So in the
Yeah.
beginning, like that hauling like gallon jugs to the garden was it's based on an actual story, and
Wow.
yeah, it was like, oh, this is so. Now I kind of wish I had my own garden. I would love to do stuff like that, but yeah.
Love
She
it,
was
love
always
it.
trying to steer me towards healthier food, so there's some of that in there, yeah. little bits of
Yeah,
me.
that's cool. Cool that you could put in some of your own experiences. So,
Mhm.
like, you've been in the comics industry, of course, for a while now. How do you think the industry has evolved creatively for the better since you've joined it?
Um, I think the way it's improved for the better is that there's so many more avenues by which you can get your story out there. And I think that's
Yeah.
amazing. You can have Patreon, you can have your own website, you can, you know, one of the things that I love about using the iPad also, I use that as my primary means of creating stuff. And it's great because a lot of times, like when I was creating the remaining three issues of Malice and Ovenland, I would work
Mhm.
all day at an ad agency and have to come home and then be sitting up at a table and just being like, um, so I like being able to like sit on the couch and have the iPad there, get in bed, have the iPad there.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. It's like wow. So and then the apps that they have out now, you can model in 3D, you can animate, they have these really cheap things. You can create whole animations, you can mix your own sound, you can record, you can have like a full animation studio right there. Of course, that providing you have the means to acquire the technology. But a lot of these things you can even do on your phone.
Yeah.
So I like that there are more mechanisms by which we can create really dynamic, stories. And I like that there are more avenues to kind of disperse it. You can publish your book on Amazon. You can join groups and you can, you know, get feedback from people who look at your stuff. You can print your own thing. You can, there's a lot of different of ways,
Yeah.
and if you're really wanting to get your stuff out there you have a lot to choose from.
Yeah. Are there simpler things that maybe you miss that have fallen by the wayside over the years?
I would like to say sleep, but the fact is I work really hard to like sleep, to get good sleep.
Yeah.
People are like, "Oh, you gotta hustle, yeah. Sleep? What's that?" And then, the next
Yeah.
day you see on Facebook, Elma passed away yesterday. I don't know what happened. So I'm trying to kind of
She worked
find the
herself.
balance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, there's no prize for that. You know what I mean? So yeah, just trying to find balance. What do I Yeah, I think that's really it. I'll probably come up with something else at like 4:30 AM. It's like, "Wait a minute."
That's how it always works. You come up with
Yeah,
this genius thing. It's like, gosh, I wish I should have said that.
yeah, 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 yeah.
But no,
Uh,
sleep is paramount. I mean, especially in any kind of creative space. I mean, I work in a different type of creative space, but yeah, you definitely have to take care of yourself. And I mean, like you said, with new tools that can help making comic creation easier and and quicker and more convenient for you. I mean, I'm sure that absolutely helps with being able to produce at the level that you want to without completely burning yourself out.
yeah, and there's also a lot of education materials too. There's
Mhm.
books you can buy, there's ebooks you can buy, and then tons of stuff online, that you can reference as far as, like, if you're into the storytelling side of it, or if you're
Yeah.
more into the drawing side of it. So yeah, I think it's really fantastic. I'm a little bit jealous, honestly. People have so many
Yeah.
things they can look at.
But the good thing about it is having access to those resources, that material that helps to break down some of the gates that may have been keeping people out. I mean, you had, of course, like Milestone and, certain things like that that were able to open it up only for some, but that's still a very small subset of so
Yeah,
many people that want to be able to create, create comics.
yeah, and it's still really small, and it's
Mhm.
also, when I see the kind of pushback, you see it on, like, when movies come out, when black characters are being introduced and things like that, and it's like, shut up. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Why does this have to be a black character? And it's like, imagine if you grew up in a world where white characters were like few to none, like your
Mhm.
whole nerd life, right?
Right. You're not the
Comics,
standard. Yeah.
movies. TV shows, you just almost never saw someone who looked like you.
Right.
It's impossible for a lot of people to envision that because it's so ingrained
Right,
even
yeah, they're
now.
used to being the standard,
Yes,
and, that's why it's kind of hard to hear a conversation or hear someone say, "Well, I don't think that I would be able to identify with this character because they're Black or because they're somebody from another marginalized group," when it's like, that's what I grew up doing
they're
my
usual.
whole life.
Yeah, your
Yeah,
entire
they're
life. I
people,
mean,
like
even with
yeah,
Charlie Brown Thanksgiving
right,
special, where Franklin was like, so
yeah. There's always some kind of thematic, you know,
yeah,
underpinning or something that can resonate with just about everybody.
yeah,
So there's
you
really
know,
no excuse. The
there's
the
really no
the only
excuse.
the
I mean,
what you're saying is something that's different that maybe you shouldn't be
yeah,
saying.
and I mean, thankfully, we had things like Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, but, even that has a kind of patina on it now that,
Yeah,
it's just like, "Oh, man.
it
I think
is
we
for
learned a
sure.
good lesson today," at the end of the episode, and it's like,
Right. Mm.
So,
Did we?
yeah, did we now? Did we really? So, yeah, I'm glad that there are more tools of the trade that people can use and more avenues because we need that, you know.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, do you have any product projects that you have coming up that you'd like to
I
talk
got
about or that you can
um,
talk about?
I
I'm
got
so
I have one
curious.
that I can talk about. It's not I illustrated it. I didn't write it.
Mhm.
But it's called Mia and Friends. I think it'll be coming out this summer, and it's all about Mia
Nice.
Hamm, who is the women's forward for the U.S. soccer team back in the '90s. And
Mhm.
it's a wonderful story. It's written by a woman named Carlin Gray, and it's all about how she came to love soccer. Mia, not Carlin, and how
Yeah.
she, came up in the team and everything. Very kind of a girl powery, kind of feeling about it.
Yeah.
It's my first, I guess, my first mainstream published work. So I'm really
Awesome.
excited about that. And I do have other things in the work, but I cannot speak on them lest I be
Mysterious.
looking at my
For those who
cats.
can't see, which is everybody except for me, she she just looked over her shoulder for
Going,
for someone mysterious creeping up on her just in case she speaks of something that she shouldn't speak of.
oh, actually, no, that's not entirely true. I'm lying.
Oh,
I'm working on an entry in the Shook Volume 2 anthology, which is
mhm.
all Black female creators, writers, and illustrators, and it's all horror.
Ooh, that's
So,
dope.
yes, I'm
Yeah.
almost done with my story for that. It's going to be called God's Blood We Deliver, and it's about an older woman who goes from being a lunch lady at school to riding an electric unicycle and delivering much needed medical supplies to people during well, I call them zombies because they're kind of vampire and zombies all in one, but the
Yeah, yeah.
zombie apocalypse. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for taking time to speak with us today. Like I really appreciate it. And I'm so glad that there are folks out there like you that are just creating wonderful things for people of all backgrounds to be able to enjoy. I don't know if you want to be found on the internet or found on socials, but if you
If
would
you
like to
want
share
to
those things,
find
please
me,
do. Yes.
yes. My Instagram is Mishmash Arts, MICHMASHARTS, and my website is the same, www.mishmasharts.com. You can find out what I'm doing. I'm most often posting stuff on Instagram, all kinds of cartoons and silly musings and photographs and things. So, yeah, check me out
Awesome.
there, please.
Yay. Thank you so much, Micheline. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ty, for having me on today. I appreciate it too.
That was great. Micheline is such a delight to listen to. I just kind of sat in the corner and listened, and it was really fascinating. Um,
She's so funny.
yeah. Thanks for setting this up, Ty. That was really great, and I'm glad that you had the time to do it, but also that Micheline had the time to do it.
Yeah.
And that's you've for the last several years when you've been features editor, even before you were features editor, when you were what was your title before?
I was contributing editor.
Contributing editor. But you've really spearheaded, every February Nerdist kind of tackling Black History Month, like nerd
Mhm.
pieces. And this year is no different. You can actually go back and read a ton of pieces that both Tai and several of our freelance writers have commissioned over the years. But what do you have in the works or on the website this year for people to read if they want to keep reading more about of your work, but also about Black content creators?
Yeah, so I've actually there's a post that's actually live right now that's about Nightlight Podcast. And they are a black led and black created horror podcast, audio. So a lot of audio dramas and everything there. I got a chance to speak with Tanya Ransom, who is the creator of Nightlight Podcast, and we just talked about kind of her horror cred and growing up a horror fan and how she ended up creating her own podcast and commissioning work and commissioning stories and really bringing those out to the masses in an audio format. So that post is really awesome. I am also working on a black exploitation post that will follow the history of horror through that. I'm in a really horror mood.
As we
this
all are
this
most of the
yeah.
time.
I am most of the time, but I'm like, yeah, this February I definitely want to look at black history and horror because I mean they just there's so much intertwining there
Mm.
between our overall history and horror and how it affects how it's affected things from that point forward. So I'm just always really excited. I got a freelance piece that's a freelancer has a piece that's coming up too that'll be really awesome. That's kind of in the that's in the anime vein of things. So
Mm.
another good Black History Month.
Absolutely. You can find all of that, of course, at nerdist.com. And yeah, Tai, you've plugged it before, but your handles are writer Tai Gooden, right? Most places.
Yes, I am writer Tai Gooden on Instagram, and that's a fun place to find me because I post a lot of random stories there.
Yeah, I mean, we should just say, like, you got to go to the premiere of the new Walking Dead spinoff, the Rashomon spinoff, and that.
Yes.
So we got to hang out for a little bit here in LA, but you got to go hang out with like Famos.
I did. It was so awesome. I'm really, really excited about The Ones Who Live. Like I mean, I've talked about this in previous episodes before, but I was a Walking Dead comics fan. I've watched the TV shows, watched the spinoffs, been in that whole sphere and that fandom for a really long time. So it felt amazing to be able to be at the premiere and get a chance to meet folks and actually like I had seen the first episode because I got a screener ahead of time, but watching it on the big screen like with everyone in the room and people's first reactions to some big moments that happened there was just it was absolutely incredible. Like I had the best time.
And you, of course, can read all of Ty's coverage of The Ones Who Live. That's what it's called, right? I was like,
Yes.
you just said it, and I was like, wait, that can't be right. Coming up soon. Yeah, because that premieres at the end of February.
Yep, February
Uh,
25th.
yeah, man. Well, thank you very much, Ty. Thanks so much for setting this up. I'm really glad that worked out. And, feel free to come back literally all the time because that's the way the show works.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all for listening. Please join me again next time on Laser Focus when my guest and guests might be a different person. Goodbye. Laser Focus is a production of Nerdist Industries and Legendary Digital Networks. It was produced, edited, and hosted by me, Kyle Anderson. For more, visit nerdist.com.